Alright, we talked about all this. In case you're wondering, that's what peat looks like. Peat moss. Peat moss. Peat moss. We're not being very specific. What if your actual first name is Peat then? Peat moss.
I think that's what my next name is going to be, Peat Moss.
That'd be really neat. Anyways. Yeah, we're just moving on. Alright, west. So we talked about Northern Europe, and now we're moving on to Western Europe. By the way, most common climate in Northern Europe would actually be human continental. For Western, we're looking at anywhere between Mediterranean to tundra, so it's kind of broad, but the most common is marine west coast. Pretty easy. Western, marine west coast. And south is dead easy. It's Mediterranean. Because, it's on the Mediterranean. But anyway, pretty simple, pretty straightforward stuff right here. The thing to understand, though, is that Europe is pretty varied. Although maybe not as much as some other places, such as the United States or even South America. Even so, you do have some pretty distinct differences depending on where you are, west, east, south, etc. And what's interesting about that is climate, again, greatly influences the cultures in those areas. I mean, if you look at Mediterranean food, for instance, everything from Italian to Greek, there's certain similarities. Where do you guys like to go? Anybody? Okay. What kind of things do you like to go? Yeah. Right on.
Yeah, I went to the like different things like homemade spaghetti and homemade ravioli and homemade pizza. Because my aunt, she's Italian.
I was going to ask if anybody's ever made their own pasta, and it's fantastic.
Yeah, me and my mom make homemade ravioli.
Do what? What's your sorry, I can't hear you. Oh, sweet. Nice. Yes, ma'am. What? Nice. Yeah. Tell you what, guys, honestly, it's not all that hard. But the thing is, the types of ingredients you introduce, the types of things you use together, are really kind of dependent upon the climate in which it originated. What I mean to say is, nowadays it's pretty easy to get international foods. Heck, you go to Myers, you go find an international food section. But for the most part, a lot of these types of things were kind of regional. And so regional cuisine developed because of what was around. What type of crops grew places. Think about something that's ubiquitous in all Mediterranean cuisine. Olive oil. Why olive oil? Why is olive oil so prevalent in Italian and Greek and all this stuff? The answer is the climate. The climate is really good for growing a specific type of plant called chiparro, which is sort of a mix of different kind of small trees or bushes that grow certain types of fruits, I suppose is the best way to describe it. But olives is one of the ones that's very common throughout this area. So olives are in pretty much everything in some fashion or another. And olive oil, being a very good ingredient for a lot of different purposes, and not just food, by the way, meant that it was pretty well spread out. So we're talking weather for a second. What causes weather? Elevation is one thing, sure. What else? What? Mother Nature? That's a lazy answer. Let's be more specific. Yes, what causes the weather to be like it is? Okay, kind of. We're getting in the right direction. Air movements, which is all generally wind. Yeah. Different kinds of winds. Have you guys ever looked at a weather map and seen how winds influence weather? For instance, you have areas of hot, areas of cold, areas of high pressure, low pressure. These things causing a little bit of air, which distributes this hot or cold all over the world. The interaction it has with elevation, the interaction it has from distance from the equator. All these things contribute to weather in Europe. But one of the things that we're going to focus on right now is winds. One of the winds that greatly influences weather, in particularly Western and Central Europe, is the Atlantic Gulf Stream. Basically, this is a wind that is a prevailing wind, prevailing easterly wind that comes and brings in moist and warm air into the area of the central part of Europe. But what happens is this hits the Alps, and it causes this almost stirring effect of the winds. So it gets spread out, almost like a blender spreading it out all over the place. And that's part of what causes the weather to be like it is in Central Europe. So the winds are affected by physical land. Now what can happen is sometimes warm winds called fogs can have a really negative effect on the Alps by causing avalanches. An avalanche is built with snow. Now here's the thing, is we don't really have to deal with this so much in the south. But if you go farther north, they deal with amounts of snow that we can't even comprehend. I think last winter they got like 16 feet of snow during that big amount of snow that's coming down. And the thing is, that much snow is pretty freaking heavy. Snow to that level can actually crush the roof of a house. And so if it might seem weird, the people will actually go up on top of their houses with a snow shovel and shovel the snow off their house. Which of course is kind of incredibly dangerous because if you think about it, underneath the snow we have ice and pretty easy to slip off, right? So they actually have all these kind of crazy designs and things you can do to knock the snow. There also one guy came with this invention, it's like a giant pole. It almost looks like a cheese grater. You just slide it down and the whole thing comes sliding down. And creates these giant snow piles, things like that. And so getting around is tricky, you know. But they've developed different types of ways of doing so people are more used to when they are here. That's where it's like, you know, Chicago might have like 8 feet of snow, it's like an hour of snow. So it's just all adaptation, I say. But avalanches are pretty dangerous things, as you can imagine. Just to show you a map of the Atlantic Stream, kind of give you an idea what's going on here. This is something that we're talking about here. And again, you can kind of see the effects from a thermal imaging of all this stuff getting distributed. Timberline, we'll get back to that. Essentially what that is a point on a mountain where trees don't grow anymore. So it's sort of like a mountain's bald spot. We'll get back to avalanches. So this is an avalanche, right? I think this is kind of a neat photo, because first of all, these are trees. See how big this thing is? It's a pretty intense thing to go through, because to put it bluntly, it's unexpected, usually, and it's a lot of weight, and it can carry you downhill at incredibly rapid rates if you get stuck in it. It can pull you off of mountains or you can fall to your death, and bury you. One of the big problems is people get buried in these things, and they don't know which way is up, and they suffocate. So, pro tip, you ever find yourself in an avalanche, you know the best way to find out which way is down? Right up. Spin. Because gravity will pull it down. And so you know which direction is down, because the opposite direction is down. So, pretty effective means, right?
So
Now, here's the thing.
You go up in an avalanche?
Well, basically this is after it's settled. Eventually she'll settle, right? And in order to fly your way out, if you're buried underneath the snow, you got to know which direction is up so you can get out. If you keep digging down into the snow, you're not going to get out, right? It's the same sort of way if you find yourself in the water, like if you're in a car, you fall off a bridge or something, you're in the water, you blow a bubble, and you follow the bubble up to the surface. Yeah, blow a bubble, follow it up. Because otherwise, we just keep swimming down here and around. So, saving lives. This is what we're doing today, saving lives. So one of the ways that European countries deal with this is they set off avalanches prematurely. Because they're most dangerous when they've accumulated too much snow, and the phones basically cause it to let go off the side of the mountain and cascade down. So what they'll do is they'll knock it loose every now and again. And in that way, it doesn't build up to a dangerous levels. How do they do that, you might ask? With dynamite thrown out of a helicopter. Wouldn't that be an awesome job?
Yeah.
It's like, no big deal, I'm just throwing dynamite out of my helicopter. I mean, that is like a pyromaniac's dream, right? Now, the thing that's also kind of neat about this, if you guys watch the Winter Olympics, sometimes they have this problem where there's too much snow building up, so they have to knock the snow down. I forget which year it was, but they had these like cannons that were air-powered pneumatic cannons that had these little like dynamite charges in them. And like they made this really high-pitched like sound as they launched these things on top of mountains and blew things up. And like they had this as part of the Olympic like in between games, like check us out, we're blowing up snow. It's like, you know, that sounds kind of lame, but it's also really awesome to watch. So fair enough. I don't think you jump into snow. What happens if you jump into snow? Same thing happens if you jump into water. You don't know what's underneath it. Well, there's different kinds of stuff, I'm sure. It also depends on how much there is. If frozen would have us believe anything, is you can totally jump off a mountain and that is so fun. Right when that movie came out, I had a little game I used to like to play with my students. I would just like try to work in, let it go somewhere in the conversation and see how many times I had to say it before someone would start singing that song. I never had to get over it once. Every time Let It Go was mentioned, it was like this karaoke night. What's going on? In fact, that's how my 4-year-old refers to it. She doesn't call it Frozen. She doesn't know it's called Frozen. She says, I want to watch Let It Go. Sometimes she says, I want to watch Elsa. So, whatever, that's fine. No big deal. That was good. That was bringing, you know, a little bit of difference to it.
We used to be best buddies, but now we're not. I wish you would tell me why. Go somewhere.
No, you jumped the gun. It doesn't have to be just so bad. You don't wait on the So my daughter has a habit of trying to just like get in the way sometimes. Like I'll have to shut the door sometimes, like do something in the tool room or whatever. And she'll come in and start knocking on the door. And one of the things I started playing with her is I would say, "Go away, Anna." And she just goes, "Okay, Mama." It's hilarious. By the way, you guys know that was recorded, right?
Oh my God!
YouTube fame, here we go. Right. Alright. Moving on. We talked about southern being most of Mediterranean. We talked about a lot of this stuff actually already, thanks to subtropical, the observation factors. One thing though that maybe we don't think about is its location is going to greatly influence the fact that this area was settled initially to trade. The first major nations in this area, the first major civilizations in Europe are going to originate in this area because of trade. Money. to this day, it remains a pretty important trade route. You guys know what the Silk Road is?
What?
The Silk Road. Yeah. You know where it was supposed to go? Not Africa. Well, at least not at the time. It was supposed to go to the Mediterranean. See, it would basically come through Turkey, modern Turkey, and disseminate throughout the Mediterranean and trade through all these different areas. Yeah.
So this is how like
Yeah, because what he was trying to do.
he was trying to go around.
Yeah. Well, no, actually. Let's talk about that for a second, because that's an important thing. Check this out. So, 1400s. This area is controlled by Muslims. The Europeans want to get to all these great stuff that they're getting from China and India, but they don't really want to play the Muslim middleman, if you will, for these goods, because they're jacking up the price. So a dude named Henry the Navigator, who was the son of the king of Portugal, decides, hey, we're going to go around Africa. The thing is, that's a long trip. To go from here to here is 11 months in a boat, one way. 11 months one way, 11 months back. So, it's a pretty long trip. In order for them to do this, they have to build outposts. This takes years. Eventually, they do it, and they have their own trade route. But Columbus is like, dude, no. We just sail west, we can make it to China, because the Earth is this big round thing, we'll make it. Now, this is where people tend to have a misunderstanding. Is they'll say, well, Columbus was saying the world is round, everyone's like, no, dude, the world's flat. No one, I don't say no one thought that. Very few people thought that. People who know are like, no, dude, it's round. You can see it, the curvature of the Earth, duh. But the thing is, there was a disagreement how big the Earth was. Columbus thought the Earth was pretty small and he could make it. The problem is, if you're sailing in a ship, at this time period, there's only a few ways you can preserve food. Okay? You can smoke it, something like bacon. You can salt it, also bacon, but also things like salt pork, salt beef, things like that. Or you can dehydrate it, dry it out really, really thoroughly, or you can pickle it. This is the only type of foods you would have for months, right? The thing is, even with like barreling all this stuff up, there's not enough space inside the ship to carry enough food to get all the way, right? So people are like, dude, you're not going to make it. You're going to die of starvation and thirst before you ever make it. Additionally, the way ships have kind of gotten around this is they sail close to the coast so they can see exactly where they are, and they have a place they can stop and get more reserve. They go get more food, things like that. If you're just sailing off in the ocean, this would be just like firing a dude in a rocket into space. You know, eventually they're going to die. They're going to run out of supplies. So Columbus was saying, no, I bet you I'll make it to China before we run out of supplies. He was gambling with his and his men's lives. So he actually was really lucky he ran into North America, because if he didn't, because they were on the verge of actually mutiny against them, killing them, stealing the ship, and turning around. So, whoa, right? So this is kind of one of those things. By the way, this is also why they put booze in all their water. Because the thing is, have you ever had like a water container opened and closed again and just sat around for like a few weeks? What happens to that water? It gets all kind of gross and stinky, and you know, you really wouldn't want to drink that, but it's the only water you have. So how do you make sure it's safe? How do you make sure it's actually somewhat palatable? Throw some booze in it. Because alcohol kills bacteria, it kills the things that make you sick, and basically it kills any taste. So they would mix alcohol with water and create a drink for frogs and taste what the sailors are all about. So, just throw that up. Anyways, one thing I think is kind of interesting though, real quick. Mediterranean, right? The easy way of spelling this is if you know the Latin words, because it's a Latin word essentially. Medi, terra, it, or terra, it. You guys know what terra is? Terra is another word for Earth, the Earth. You can call our planet Terra to be correct. Okay? So Terra. Medi, any idea what that sounds like? Medi. Middle, correct. The Mediterranean Sea, the sea in the middle of the earth. From the perspective of the Greeks and the Romans who named it, this was the entire world. They didn't know about anything else outside of this. So to them, this is literally the sea in the middle of the earth. Make sense? Mediterranean. The Alps also function as a barrier for moisture. So this is sort of rain shadow effect we were talking about. It also helps to create cold winds coming from the north, which, if they're coming from the north, they're called mistrals. They tend to be cold, dry winds. If you have winds coming from the north, they're generally coming from the Mediterranean. In fact, they also come from Africa, because you guys know there's the Sahara Desert. You didn't know that, now you do. And so they tend to be dry, hot, wet winds. They pick up moisture in the Mediterranean, and they distribute there. These interact to create weather in these different places. Fun fact, do you guys know what Sahara means? It's actually an Arabic word, al-Sahara, which just means desert. Yeah. The Sahara Desert, the desert desert. You see, the funny thing about name or place names, when we name things, is they tend to be really good at describing what's there. The only real difference to that would maybe be Greenland and Iceland, because of the opposite. But for the most part, you know, you've got deserts like Al-Sahara. My favorite named desert is the Taklamakan. It's in Central Asia. That name translates from Turkish into the place where you go in but don't come out. That's its place of death. Hell, we even have in America the Death Valley. Pretty good quote. You can't get more descriptive than that. You know? And it's just kind of funny because we have all these different names. They sound so exotic, but often it's just like, well, it's literally describing what's there. So I just think that's kind of neat. I'm going to show you guys real quick a picture showing the movement of sand from the Sahara into the southern part of Europe. What's neat about this is soil has all kinds of different chemical traces to it. And so if you know your stuff, you can actually trace where soil has come from. And so we have found particulates of soil from Africa in the southern part of Europe. So we know, for instance, that it gets blown across the Mediterranean by sirocco's. It's kind of neat. That's the Sahara Desert, by the by. Yeah, it's a bit toasty. But what's funny about this, there's also a dramatic change in temperature. For instance, during the day, it can be anywhere between 120 degrees Fahrenheit to 130 degrees Fahrenheit. During the night, it goes down to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, which doesn't seem like, you know, that's really that frigid, but consider this. This morning was, 55? So it's about that temperature. If you are ill prepared for it, you can actually die from that temperature. That's the kicker right there. We as human beings can survive in any climate that this world can throw at us. Now, think about the most inhospitable place you can imagine. There's no oxygen, so we can't breathe. The pressure is so overbearing that you will implode if you are unprotected. It is so cold that you will freeze to death, but because of the pressure, your blood will boil before you do. Your eyes will literally squish out of their sockets, right? There's no food, there's no life, nothing can survive there. It is an utter desert, right? And that's space. And we have dudes living in it. Right? That's just like, I mean, space is really inhospitable if you're ill protected, but we can survive anything if we're prepared. See what I'm saying? If we use our technology, we can live anywhere. And that's something to understand when it comes to these places, like the extreme heat and the extreme cold, like we find in the Nordic Peninsula. People live there. They've developed cultures that take advantage of these environments. That's pretty cool to get right down to. This is kind of talking we talked about earlier before. Now it's just how it is. All right. Do you guys know where the Olympics came from?
Oh, yeah.
The Greeks, yeah. What were they doing?
They were running naked.
Well, they did that too. Yes, for the Olympic gods, yeah. The celebration of the gods was a time of peace. That being said, all of the early sports, if you will, were involved around war, things that warriors did. Running makes sense whenever you're going everywhere by foot, and it's a big deal when it gets to combat. Throwing the javelin as a spear throw. Swimming was something that was important in the event you had to go across waterways. Wrestling, obviously. And as someone else pointed out, they did all these different sports completely in the nude. The reason for that wasn't because they were like this weird, it was because it allowed people to not take an unfair advantage. The idea is that you're literally going in with no advantages except for your physical state. I put it kind of in a similar modern thing in the modern sport of archery. Whenever you use a bow, you can't use any special stuff on it. Everyone has to use the exact same equipment and cast. So no one has that technological advantage. It's only the skill that gives you a better advantage. So that's just kind of a neat thing. That being said, they did allow them to be covered in oil, specifically olive oil. And that meant it was a little bit harder to get a grasp on somebody. So for instance, they had a sport kind of similar to American football, where they would tackle each other and stuff like that. And you just got to imagine these folks covered in oil and going down and tackle just sort of like sliding like a stone. And the thing is, stuff gets stuck on them. And not to mention, they're sweating and things like that. You're covered in oil. And so the end of sporting, and so the end of sporting events, these guys, in order to get all the oil and everything else off them, including the sweat and grossness, they would take these things called scrapers, which look a bit like a squeegee and you clean a window with. They would scrape all this gunk off of them and then put it in a bowl, right? Then they would then sell that bowl, and some people would buy it because it was seen as, other people, I guess it's just a bit weird to be honest. There's a way of owning a part of your favorite athletes, things like that. Yeah, sweat oil gross. Yeah, exactly. I mean, look at what people buy off of eBay, you know. This was Justin Bieber's right sock. People do weird stuff, man. The other main thing that's a part of Chaparral that's very popular in this area is wine. And wine was one of the ways you could preserve fruit past the time that it would normally rot. Because I don't know if you guys have ever had grapes in the fridge. They go bad pretty darn quick, don't they? Yeah. So what you do is you make alcohol out of them, and then that preserves that for later. Preservation of food was really, really important for, I mean, it's still really, really important to us today. We have a lot of technology that helps us along with that. There's all kinds of chemicals we can use to preserve food past a certain point in time. We can freeze things, we can refrigerate things. There's all kinds of things. And they didn't have these advantages at these times, so they had to basically keep their animals alive for as long as possible. This is one of the things I think is kind of interesting because in our own society, we are really not comfortable with the idea that our meat used to have a face. You know, that meat is an animal, and a lot of us are kind of okay with the idea of eating meat, but if we had to actually slaughter our own animals and process them, that's probably going to make a lot of us pretty squeamish, yeah. The fact of the matter is, we're pretty far removed from the process of actually growing food. Now, some of us probably have a garden, you know, something like that, but that's pretty much the extent of our experiences. We're not used to actually growing everything ourselves, and really probably have no idea where most of our food comes from beyond the store where I bought it, I guess. So it's kind of interesting to see how that influences our opinions on things. Now that being said, we also have access to foods that people really wouldn't dream of in these times. I remember my grandparents telling me one of the things that was one of their favorite Christmas gifts to get was an orange.
That's my favorite.
It seems a bit weird, I think, to us, because I mean you can buy oranges like at any time, you know. They've got those little cuties. I don't really like oranges, so I don't really know. But you know, the thing is they were rare, you know. Yeah, citruses, things like that. But it's kind of ingenious also to think about how early households dealt with this. Now nowadays you can go buy all this food around the season. It's pretty great. I mean, technology has allowed us to have such a surplus of food that you know we have access to it pretty much at all times. Other people maybe not so fortunately. All right, Northern Europe. As I said, mostly humid continental. You do have instances of deciduous and coniferous forests as well as grasslands under the far north. Let's talk about forests for a second. How do you guys have noticed? Actually, let's do this real quick. Give me an example of a fairy tale. Cinderella. Okay, let's keep going. Princess and the Frog. I see you guys are sticking with Disney here. Yes.
Let it go.
Yeah, let it go. That would actually be the Ballad of the Snow Queen. That's Swan Princess. Anastasia. Anastasia is actually based on a historic figure. I don't know if that's a fairy tale per se. She's got an interesting story behind her. But I want to know. Have you guys know Hansel and Gretel? Humpty Dumpty. Nursery rhyme, but it kind of fits. Right? Alright, now think about this for a second. How many of those stories we just mentioned have a forest in them at some point, or woods in them at some point? Almost all of them, yeah. The reason is, the cultures that presented these stories, right? The ones that came up with these, they were often about describing the supernatural world. And one of the things about forests is they're unknown. Woods are scary places. There are wild animals that live in them. Not today anymore, but in that time, we didn't have massive amounts of forest cleared. And think about it, we've cut down so much forest land in our world that they just, I mean, we have places that are like, yeah, we're just going to leave this part of the wood right here so we don't cut it all down. That's what a national park is, essentially. It used to be like Europe was covered in woods, and they represented to the early mind a place that was a place to be really afraid. This is where wolves and bears and scary things lived. It's a place that was dark and kind of spooky, and so they have these kind of negative connotations associated with it. In fact, there was even a play that President did a number of years ago that is about a bunch of the different fairy tales kind of jammed together in one story called Into the Woods. Yep. I forgot they did make a review based on it as well. Yeah, Into the Woods. Again, they play on that. I mean, by the way, I don't know if you guys were aware of this fact, but you guys know that Elsa was the original antagonist of that movie, yes?
Yes.
And she was going to be the bad guy. No Prince Hans, none of that was needed in it. She was just going to be the bad guy. Well, they changed the ending because of one song, Let It Go. That song changed the character from being just an antagonist to this sort of sympathetic character that changed everything around.
Because it's almost like time, it's like she has a heart that's like really evil.
Yeah, I forgot it. Once Upon a Time is like they're just scraping the bottom of the barrel for some of these stories at this point.
The movie, Narnia,
Yes.
that is my favorite.
You know what's funny about that is there's a lot of Turkish ones in it that no one really realizes unless you speak the language. So for instance, Aslan, you know, Arslan is a Turkish word that means lion. So he's literally named a lion. So just stuff like that is just kind of funny to me. But yes, C.S. Lewis and all those works. But my favorite of his is actually Screwtape Letters. Anyways, moving on. This is the last bit here. One thing I did want to talk to you guys about real briefly before you catch it on YouTube. All this is recorded on YouTube. You can go find it.
What's your channel?
It's actually linked on there. It's called the Press History Channel. Or
If you go to folders, it says that, like, it's a folder and it says YouTube channel.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
You know. You've been looking at the folders. You know this. But let's finish up. One thing I did want to talk to you guys about briefly is if you guys actually look at the old origins of fairy tales, they are very freaking dark.
Oh, yeah.
They were meant to also kind of spook people out like ghost stories.
Like the one story on Disney Channel, Switches.
Don't know?
I love like about these twin sisters and they were magic, but like it was like they were constantly haunted by this dark magic. Let's watch it.
Let's talk real briefly about because I may actually show you guys. Actually, yeah, I'm not going to I'm going to show you guys if I can talk. It's still on Netflix. There's a series that ran in the 1980s called The Storyteller, and in it they retell some famous stories from Germany, Russia, all these different places. It's very dated, it's very 1980s. It was actually made by Jim Henson. You guys know who Jim Henson is? Okay, he's the guy who started the Muppets. So he did like all of the original Muppet characters. He's also the guy who did all of the aliens and the Star Wars movies. Anyways, guys, but they really focus on some of these kind of like darker aspects of fairy tales. And like for instance, think about this. You guys know Rumpelstiltskin?
Yeah.
Okay. What did he want in exchange for his help? Yeah, her firstborn child. Yeah. Why? So he could eat it. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yes. Rumpelstiltskin. Yes. Yeah, they use only like a dark sorcerer and that. Like that.
I do not like it. It's so mean. And then especially when he changed
And I think it's really kind of funny to me too, guys, is there's a lot of stuff that they did in the early, like in the 70s and 80s, animation with kids programming, that they did not care if they gave you nightmares. That was like almost their freaking goal, was to just freak people out. I forget the name of the thing, but it was part of Disney's Halloween program. And there's this thing where like there's this mad scientist who captures Pluto, and he's gonna like torture him to death. And like there's all these shadow plays. So there's this one part where like he's like cutting the shadow of Pluto in half with a pair of scissors.
Like Pluto,
like Mickey's dog. Like it's just so incredibly messed up. You're like, what were they thinking? It's freaking Halloween. If you think about Halloween, is all about going to that scary place, going into the macabre, and just like embracing it, right? I don't know if you guys have been to the mall. They've got those Halloween stores open now.
love it.
I don't know about the ones in those malls, but in the Green Tree Mall, they have this big one. And so I was with the kiddos yesterday at the playground, and they wanted to go to Halloween store. So I'm like, okay, cool. And they've got all those like animatronic things that you set up front to scare the hell out of people. And so I was like, I wonder how she's going to handle this, because Harper really hasn't been around too much of the spooky stuff. Em's too really young to like notice anything, but Harper's old enough to get it. And so like they had this one that like leapt out at you, like it was really sudden. It was funny because we were in there and there was like 2 or 3 college age folks that were looking at it, and the college folks were like screaming, and Harper kind of like jumps, and then she laughs. She goes, "That's funny." The guy was like, see this thing scary? She ain't even scared, But it was just hilarious to me. She was kind of like I was like, she was definitely like, this is kind of creepy, but there's like, oh, that's fun. They had like the statue of like two people cut in half and sewed together like human centipede style. And she looked at it like, that's gross. I was like, she's gonna be totally like horror movies, isn't she? Just alright, whatever, that's fine. But we're gonna be looking a little bit at that kind of stuff as we go here. As I said, we're gonna watch a documentary on Halloween itself. Like kind of the origins of the holiday. Because it really is pertinent to this section we're talking about. And also, just an FYI, next week we're gonna talk about our project. Okay. I may actually retcon what I was gonna have you guys do about the movie thing, because I was thinking a little bit harder about that. Like, that's really kind of meta. I don't know if you guys will have an easy time with that. So I might just go. I think I'm going to go back to the Olympics version. And that way you guys have a little bit more of a cut and dry thing to do as opposed to it's a little bit funky. So, anyways, we'll be looking at that next week and kind of beginning the stage, setting the stage for stuff for any of the conversation. That's it for today, guys. Because of the Aztec.
No, don't do that.